Hello and welcome to Dressmaking Amore. Today I want to share with you how to sew a perfectly elegant panel dress. I'm sure you've seen this very popular silhouette by lots of designers, and I was so excited to make my own version of it, originally inspired by an Oscar de la Renta gown. The 12 panels are beautifully sewn together for this graceful fit and flare silhouette, and the squared neckline complements the voluminous skirt. Of course, we'll be using my pearl dress PDF sewing pattern, so to follow along, get yours at the link below in the description. Here are the materials you'll need. Please refer to your instructional booklet that comes with your pattern to choose your right size and print and assemble the pattern perfectly, as well as follow the cutting instructions. And all of the steps for the whole sewing process of this dress are in there. Now for this elegant and luxurious look, I'll be using an off-white satin fabric with a very soft cotton lining. You can use any dress weight woven fabric, something like a silk, sateen, jacquard, or a linen. And here we have the lining pieces, front and back, as well as all of our shell pieces of the front and back. And of course, make sure to mark the wrong side of all of your pieces so that you won't get confused later on. Okay, let's get to sewing. To prep our pattern pieces, we'll need to stabilize the neckline and the armhole edges of all of our pieces using a 1.3 cm or ½ inch wide fusible interfacing strip to do so. Also interface the center back edge of detail number 6 to stabilize it for our zipper closure using a 3 cm or 1¼ inch wide strip of interfacing. Take the front pieces number 1, 2, and 3 and pin the princess seams right sides together, first matching at the waist notches and then all the other notches. Just like this. We'll sew these seams, but first I'll pin the other half of the front as well. And now we can move on to sewing with 1.2 cm or ½ inch seam allowances. Then serge or overlock all of the vertical edges. You can serge them separately or serge them together and then press. Also, I'll serge the center front edge. To embed the threads into the fabric, press all of the serged edges, making sure they're completely flat, getting rid of any waviness. Then press the seams towards the center front. Use a tailor's clapper to help give the fabric the needed curved shape at the bodice. Now we can place the two front halves right sides together and pin the center front edge, of course matching all of the marks. And I serge this here before sewing because I want to press the seam open. And that's what I'll do now. Now we're going to work with our back pieces. Take the back piece number 4, side panel, and pin it to piece number 5, the middle panel, right sides together, matching the marks, and then piece number 5 to number 6, center back panel. Sew and serge the seam edges. And also serge the center back edge and the side seam edge. And in the same way, sew the other half of the back. Now press all the seams, and then press them towards the center back. It's really important to be pressing and cooling our seams all the time during the sewing process, using something like a wooden tailor's clapper to take away heat and moisture, allowing the stitching to almost embed into your fabric, leading to smoother seams and the right form of your garment. Now place both halves of the back right sides together, matching the waistline and the marks of the closure at the bottom, and pin together from that closure mark down. We're going to sew the center back seam from here down, and the seam allowances are 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch for the center back seam, so that there's room for adjustments if needed. Press the seam open, and then continue to press the same seam allowances of 2 centimeters along the closure edge like this. This crease will be our guideline later on. We are on to our zipper closure. Take your invisible zipper and place it right sides together with the seam allowances. Now unzip, leave one tape, and line it up so that the zipper teeth are lying right along our crease, and pin. We can turn it over now, so just unfold the seam allowances and place the teeth next to the crease. The seam allowances for the closure are 2 centimeters. And I'm showing you here a little more advanced version of sewing an invisible zipper, so if you're newer to this, you should baste stitch the zipper first so it won't move while you're sewing. Unfold the zipper teeth away and sew right into the crease with an invisible zipper machine foot. Sew up to the fold of the fabric. And now we can close the zipper and transfer the marks at the waist and at the end of the seam to the unsewn side of the zipper tape. Open the zipper and pin the other side of the zipper tape to the dress, matching the marks at the waist, start and end. Make sure everything looks good, and sew the other side of the zipper tape. Here it is. Now zip it up and check that everything matches and you like how it looks. You can see the finished zipper here on the wrong side and on the right side. Of course, we'll finish this step with pressing, but lightly, and using the edge of my sleeve board so I only get the seam here. Here's our beautiful invisible zipper closure. Just like we sewed the shell of the dress, we'll repeat everything to sew the lining. Pin and sew the princess seams, and serge the edges, completing this step for both halves of the front. Press the edges, and then join the 2 halves of the front and press again. And repeat for the back of the lining, sewing, serging, and pressing all of the panels. With the shell and the front lining right sides together, pin at the neckline, matching the center and princess seams. Then pin all along the neckline like this. Flip it to the shell side, and as you see, here's the interfaced edge of the neckline. We need to take a ruler and mark 1.2 centimeter or ½ inch seam allowances at the shoulder seams. I'm using a disappearing ink pen here. Make marks just like these so that we'll have nice and sharp corners. Now take the back lining and the shell and pin it right sides together at the neckline as we did previously. Again, turn to the shell side and check the length of the straps, making sure that they're the same here. Everything should lay nicely, and again mark the seam allowances at the shoulder seams. Sew the necklines of the front and back from the shell side, starting and finishing sewing right at our marks. Now we need to trim the seam allowances in half, leaving just about 5 millimeters. And then clip the seam allowances at the curve like this. Then turn it to the right side, and with the seam allowances turned towards the lining, understitch the lining, starting and ending 2.5 centimeters or an inch from the top edge like this. Now that our seam allowances are clipped, this job is much easier. If your seams are matching, perfect. If not, don't worry, as there are lots of layers of fabric to maintain. My fingers are controlling the fabric and the seam allowances underneath, here as you see, so go slow and steady as you sew. This should turn out nicely like this. In the same way, we'll sew the back neckline. Here my lining is a little longer than the main fabric, but for now, I'll leave it like this. Starting to sew right at the marks on our shell side, sew all around. Then right away, I'll start at the other side, placing it exactly at the same distance, so I know my seam will match on both edges. Then trim the seam allowances in half, leaving about 5 millimeters or 1/4 inch, and make clips at the curve. Again, turn to the right side and understitch the lining. Start 2.5 centimeters away from the top of the shoulder and understitch the seam allowances so our seam goes on the lining. Once we sewed and understitched our lining, press the front and back necklines. First press from the lining side, ever so slightly pulling the main fabric out to press everything flat. The main fabric should be just a tiny bit visible from the wrong side of the dress. In this way, we are sure that the lining won't be turning over to the right side. Because the main fabric is visible from the wrong side, the lining has become a little longer, as you see, and that's why we cannot do the neckline and the armholes in one step. 2 steps are necessary here to finish this. So give it a nice press like so. And in the same way, we're going to press the lining of the back. After this, we close the zipper and check for evenness at the top edge of the closure. If you flip the lining to the wrong side, the edges of the back should be at the same level. Pin the shell and the lining along the armhole while it's laying flat and matching the seams. We may need to true the lining as it shouldn't stick out or be visible underneath the shell. Check that everything looks good, and if you didn't clip the seam allowances at an angle, do it now so that they won't be in our way. Place them right sides together, and we're going to pin the armhole. Now this mark here on our lining is going to match with the edge of the main fabric. Match the princess seams and the edges of the straps and pin it all together like this. Now from the shell side, we're going to mark the seam allowances at the shoulder edge at the top and at the side. Then we'll sew starting here to the end, just as we did with the neckline. Now we're going to repeat the same process for the back armholes. Sew the armholes from the dress side, leaving the shoulder seam allowance unsewn. And then trim the seam allowances in half, leaving about 5 millimeters or 1/4 inch and clip at the curve. Now flip it all out to the right side and press all the armhole edges of the front and back, making it all beautifully flat with none of the lining being visible at the right side. Let's finish our back. Unzip the zipper and turn the lining away so that we can place it with the dress right sides together along the zipper like this. Then at the top, turn the seam allowances over to the lining. And here at the end, we're going to sew, ending our seam 2 centimeters before the actual zipper end. We're going to sew from the main fabric interface side, making sure to catch the zipper tape, but before that, repeat the steps for the other half. Use a narrow or one-sided zipper machine foot to catch the zipper tape while sewing. Here's what it should look like. And at the other side, to sew from the interface side, I'll need to start sewing at the bottom. So start with the back stitch like always and sew. As I near the top, I know that my machine is going to start pushing the fabric around, so I'll end here and start sewing from the top down so I can control my fabric better. Now we can check if our top edge is even, and fold it in carefully so that the right side will look sharp and pretty, and see if you like it. Once we sewed the lining to the zipper, zip up the dress and check everything. The top edge is even, the wrong side looks good, and I'll press it a bit here. And now we can finish up the zipper. Lay out your dress right side up. We sewed only to where our zipper is sewn in. You can see where our lining is sewn, and the mark for our hip line, they should be at the same distance. We will sew 1 inch below that mark. So pin just the lining edges right sides together like this, matching up the marks 2.5 centimeters below that mark. This means our opening will be about 7 to 10 centimeters long. Pin and sew the rest to the lining. Here's the result. And then press the seam open. Here's how nicely it lays. Check the straps of the front and the back. If you sewed evenly, they should be the same width. With the front and back right sides together, unfold the lining at the top edge away, and I've pinned it so it stays in place. And now we can pin together the shoulder seams of only the main shell fabric, like this. Everything looks even, and now we will sew the shoulder seams of the shell. Unpin and check how it looks. Here we have the sewed shoulder seams, and in the middle is the lining. We'll press it open like this. Then fold and hide the shoulder seam allowances inside under the lining, doing this to both sides. Use a pin to help you hide everything nicely inside, creating sharp corners just like this. Pin this so they'll stay in place before you start sewing, and then take a needle and thread and by hand, starting from inside, sew the lining edges together with a blind stitch. In this video, I'll show you just one option of finishing the side seams for the dress. There are more ways to sew this. Place the front and back right sides together and pin the side seams of the shell, matching the armhole seam and the waistline marks. Then we're going to flip up the lining so that we can pin the side seams of the lining right sides together, matching all of the notches as well. And starting from the armhole, first checking that everything matches, sew the side seam of the shell first. And then sew the side seam of the lining. Once we sewed the side seams of the main fabric and the lining, we need to check how it's joined at the armhole. See if you like it and that everything is smooth, perfect match, and now we can move on to pressing the seam allowances of the side seams open. I'm using a sleeve board here since it'll be very useful to get just the seam I need. Turn to the right side and match the side seams of the shell and the lining, placing the seam allowances into the right places, and pin. Then press the armholes carefully. Smooth out the seam allowances and then place another pin closer to the waistline like this on both sides. We're pinning together the lining and the main fabric, so make sure that the seam allowances are open and flat underneath. Flip up the shell to show the wrong side and find the seams. Here's the waistline mark, which is pinned, so I won't be orienting myself at the notch anymore, but at the pin that we just pinned. So join the lining and the shell seam allowances together at the waistline, and do the same at both sides. What we'll do here is sew the shell and the lining seam allowances together just for about 2 to 5 centimeters. In this way, we secure the lining in place so it won't move around. And this is easy to do. Just take the seam allowances and sew, joining them at the sides like this. My lining at the waistline will be secure this way. Turn over to the right side and take out the pins that we used as guides. Now for this pearl dress, we cut the main dress and the lining from the same pattern. Usually the lining is shorter than the main fabric, so we can either do different hemming on the main fabric and the lining, or to shorten the lining, lay it on a flat surface, orienting yourself with the center back seam, and mark 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch up from the bottom edge all around. Then cut following the newly marked line. serge or overlock the bottom edge of the shell and the lining, and then fold the serged edge to the wrong side and stitch it all around 5 to 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch from the folded edge. Press the hem all around. And as for the last step, we can join the lining and the shell together at the side seams of the bottom hem edge. Knowing that now our lining is 1 inch shorter than the dress, pin the lining to the seam allowances at the side seams and the center back seam 1 inch away from the hem edge. Now to connect it to the dress so it won't move around your body, take a needle and thread with about 3 to 5 threads together and make a chain connection. Connect the seam allowances of the lining and the dress hem like this. Do this all around where we pinned. And of course, giving your entire garment a finishing press like always, we are done with our stunning pearl dress. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this inspires you to sew this lovely piece yourself. I know you'll love it. You can get the PDF downloadable sewing pattern that I used below at the link in the description of this video, and happy sewing!